So we can talk about how to build urban resiliency to climate change. Obviously, Daniel, the mayor, has his plan. It's out. It's very ambitious. It's going to have to be carried forward by the next administration. But what can we do? How much is it going to cost to actually try to create a city, not just here in New York, but the other cities up and down the Northeast that might be vulnerable to these kind of events? What can be done to prepare them?
Well, a lot of it really comes down to, of course, money, but maybe more importantly is will. Mm-hmm. We have to be willing and able to really put our money where our mouth is in terms of planning. And so the city has laid out, of course, a $20 billion plan. Those sort of costs, I can only imagine, would be multiplied by a number of factors if you look at all of the vulnerable cities that are around the United States for these risks. I think it's important to recognize that as the federal government has shown up in quite a large way with funding, that we aren't able to continue to rely on that sort of funding. And so working with Swiss Re and working with others, we really demonstrated that the impacts of a Sandy or a Sandy-like event, or thinking more broadly towards other climate change impacts, start to become unaffordable if we don't make the right investments now. And so our plan is really about identifying cost-effective but ambitious solutions to address these plans. And it's not a lot of little plans. There's I think to the point of the World Bank just a few minutes ago, there is a large plan because this is a large risk that is made up of very specific topics around our city in ways we can invest in order to reduce that future risk. I think that's a key point.
Judith, I know resilience has become a bit Rockefeller Foundation focus. If you bring it to it.
It is. If we talk just about this region, I think that there are some core activities that are critical going forward, and one of them is a better assessment of our coastline. There's been a lot of attention to the Southeast and the Gulf Coast in terms of the vulnerability of the coastal areas, and actually much less attention and study. So we're working with the Army Corps of Engineers and several academic sets of experts to really examine Southern Virginia through Northern Maine and try to determine, to your point, Dan, a holistic approach to hard and soft infrastructure. You know, each region can build its own seawall or levee or set of responses, but water gets displaced somewhere. And so the question of how we develop a kind of integrated solution for the Mid-Atlantic all the way through the Northeast states are critical when we look at coastal responses. The second question is, we have some of the most densely populated urban areas in this region, and how you build resilience in a densely populated urban area, I think, is a really critical and important question. We rely so heavily on our transportation systems. The subway, when it's down, has tremendous impact. And so each unit, as they think about what their new investments are, need to think about the fact that they will be under attack, if you will, from some sort of shock or stressor. The MTA is beginning to think about rapid bus transit, both because it's energy efficient and climate responsive, but also because it tends not to go down as readily when there are flooding episodes. So all of these things require both deep analysis and then new ways of thinking about how and what you rebuild. It isn't only about the money, but it is taking some of the money that we still have for the recovery and using it in more creative ways. We mentioned before the role of communities. There is no doubt that community resilience is as key in response to some of these episodes as infrastructure resilience. And so one of the initiatives that we've been working with is a federal government initiative led by Sean Donovan called Rebuild by Design, which is trying to take the lessons of what we learned from all the afflicted communities, the waterways, the coastal areas, develop a global competition that 10 teams have now been chosen of leading architects and planners and engineers from around the world who will develop ideas using the federal recovery money for part of the rebuild process, but will engage with the local communities. So it'll be a very iterative, interactive process so that you're building the deep knowledge that the relevant communities have, along with the deep knowledge that the experts have, to create a more resilient, both social infrastructure at the same time that you're building a more resilient physical infrastructure. And we're very excited about that competition and several others. Governor Cuomo has a race to the top competition for communities, for their resilience plans. So a lot of effort going into, now that we're in the post-immediate recovery phase, in how you really think differently about how we rebuild.
Richard.
So I was going to say that this infrastructure that we're talking about, this energy infrastructure, and principally we're talking in New York State and New York City, is really about the electricity infrastructure, although there is a transportation infrastructure that we have to talk about too. But we're talking about something that we don't have to imagine it and we don't have to invent new things because the technology exists. So the question is how we're going to implement it, and there is a degree of financing, but I think we would suggest that if not right away, in not a very distant future, this is financeable. It's financeable by the market. Because we pay a lot of money for our electricity in the state of New York. So the bill that we pay is an expensive bill. And so and if we can't pay for it through the market today, over time through scale, the costs will come down. And so when I say we may be able to pay for it, let me just give you some ideas about how that might be the case. There are going to be energy efficiency benefits that come from this smarter, more resilient energy system. And so you'll be able to save more money on your bill. The cost of ownership will be less because all our electronics rely upon the quality of power. And there's a lot of money that companies put into protecting their electronics. And the kind of resilient power system that we're talking about will provide better and more reliable power, which means the cost of ownership will go down. Resiliency we've talked about, lots of people are prepared to pay a premium, both the people that put in standby generators as well as other companies, that individuals as well as businesses pay for resiliency. Then this is a key point. The grid itself needs support. And so these ideas of community grids can provide support to the rest of the grid. So they can produce power all the time, which is what can provide power in the event of a problem with the grid, but the rest of the time it can provide support to the grid. And it means that we need a less expensive and capital-intensive grid, which also means it's financeable. And it doesn't take into account any other ancillary benefits that consumers could get. So I think what we don't know is exactly what it costs. The technology has been used in different places, but the different technology pieces have never been brought together to see how these different pieces would work. Because really what we're talking about is a kind of new utility model. And so we need to figure out how the technology works together. We need to figure out the economics. We need to figure out the services that our consumers are going to have. And we need to figure out the regulatory structure and the financing models that would work to support all this. But all this can be done.
Gary, is this mostly a local urban question, or again, in an era where we're a bit tightened when it comes to finances, what role can the national government play on something like this?
Right. I think it's clearly a very important partnership going forward. And one of the, I think, lessons from Sandy is that across the range of federal programs that there are and the way in which the federal government intersects with state and local governments, with local communities, that we need to be thinking through a climate lens about what are the vulnerabilities that communities face and what are the kinds of resilient steps that can be taken. So the president, in issuing his climate action plan, included real focus on resiliency as one of the 3 key elements: a focus on reducing domestic emissions, a focus on the international negotiations and discussions and partnerships that Todd spoke about in the last panel, and then a real focus on resilience. So we now have worked with every federal department and agency to help them look across their programs and make that kind of an assessment. And it's an assessment both for their own operations, for protecting federal resources as good public stewards of resources, as well as looking at where does the federal government intersect with state and local governments and thinking about resilience. And one of the, I think, key things that the president called for is the development of a state, local, tribal leaders task force to help us really begin to understand those range of areas where we do intersect, because we are really in many ways just at the beginning stage of learning about these many challenging issues.
Right. And Philip, for insurance?
The observation that we would make, if you look at the economic climate adaptation study, what it shows is that for a municipality, government, or the taxpayer, the return on investment is extraordinary by stabilizing your primary systems. We all know what those are, water, sewage, transportation, electricity. Once you stabilize those, you narrow the range of outcomes for the insurance industry, which means we can price better products, more cost-effective products, and be a better part of the solution. We've done that in a number of areas. There are a number of great examples, whether it's Mexico and Mexico City, state of Alabama. There's quite a long list, and it's a priority for us. But what insurance can do when you get to that point is reduce the volatility or eliminate the volatility, so you can plan and finance for climate adoption and climate change on a longer term basis. You're not lurching from one crisis to the next financially.
And just as a follow-up on that, looking at the threats that come from climate change, is there anything specific that that we're missing or that doesn't get the attention it deserves? We know post-Sandy the impact of extreme weather. We talked about droughts earlier. Anything else out there that can become from climate change that maybe isn't on the radar in the way it should be?
Well, I think the biggest challenge and the biggest unknown, even for a company full of statisticians like we have, is that it's simpler to look at the adaptation that needs to happen for the current climate event. And the hard part is, what's the climate event 30 years out? We have spent a lot of time in various studies and clients on that, but I think that's the challenge, is what are you planning for in the future? It's easy to look at, or easier to look at water levels and where you need to have those barriers, but the Colorado floods are seen that we can't predict.
Brian, can I just say something about money, though? Because often we think about all of the incredibly expensive things that need to be done, and there are many, many. But there are also some extremely low-cost things that have to do with building back smart. Take, for example, promulgating a local regulation that says anytime one of the vendors opens up a street, whether it's to lay new pipes or lay wires or do whatever, that all of the vendors who could be and should be finding that useful are notified and can bury their lines or put their new pipes in at the same time. You share the cost, very low cost, much less disruption to the residents and businesses in the city, and a way of really sharing resources. Anytime you repave a road or put in new sidewalks, you're going to do it anyway, you're going to spend the money, put in materials that absorb water more quickly and release it more slowly. Those materials are available, so there's not a single way to do something. But some of the things that we're spending money on anyway, we ought to be doing in a way that's smart and that continues to reduce our risk.
Mm-hmm.